Skyrim is a world built on discovery. You explore caves, ruins, forgotten towers, always expecting treasure, enemies, or maybe a bit of lore along the way. Most of the time, you know what you're walking into, but sometimes you don't. Sometimes you find something that doesn't fit, something that isn't just dangerous, but unsettling in a way that lingers long after you've left. A scene that tells a story without saying anything. A place that feels wrong even when it's quiet. Discoveries that make you stop not because of what you have to fight, but because of what you're looking at. And the thing is, Skyrim never announces these moments. You just stumble into them. A hidden room, a journal left behind, a detail that doesn't make sense at first, until it does. And when it does, it changes how you see the place entirely. These aren't the biggest locations, they're not the most important, but they are the ones that stick with you, because they show a different side of Skyrim, one that isn't about adventure or heroism, but something much darker and much quieter, and far harder to forget. Windhelm already feels cold the moment you set foot in the city, and not just because of the snow. It's a city built on tension, political, cultural, social, and that tension gives it a kind of harshness that you don't feel in other major holds. People are divided, conversations are sharp, and there's a constant sense that something is just slightly off beneath the surface. But even within a city like that, the events of Blood on Ice stands out as something different. Not louder, not more dramatic, but more personal, more invasive. Because instead of facing an external threat, you're dealing with something that's already inside the city, hiding in plain sight. The first sign of it is almost easy to miss. A body in the graveyard. It's not presented like a major event. There's no dramatic build-up, no large crowd reacting in shock. It's quiet, contained, almost routine in how it's handled. And that's what makes it so effective, because the lack of reaction doesn't make the situation feel less serious. It makes it feel normalized, like this isn't the first time something like this has happened. And as you start to investigate, that feeling only gets stronger. The killer, eventually revealed, isn't some distant figure operating from the shadows of a dungeon or hidden ruin. He's part of the city. He runs a shop. He speaks to you like any other NPC. There's nothing immediately threatening about him, nothing that signals what he really is. And that's what makes the discovery so unsettling, because it reframes everything. You've walked past him, you've interacted with him, and all the while he's been responsible for something far darker than anything happening outside the city's walls. His motives make it even worse. He isn't killing randomly, he's collecting. Harvesting body parts in an attempt to reconstruct someone he's lost. Driven by a twisted, obsessive logic that feels disturbingly grounded. It's not about power or chaos or even survival. It's about control, about reshaping life itself in a way that shouldn't be possible. And that's where the quest shifts from being a simple investigation to something far more uncomfortable. Because you're no longer just stopping a murderer, you're uncovering the mindset behind it, the reasoning, the justification. And the more you understand it, the more unsettling it becomes. The clues scattered throughout the quest reinforces this. The journals, the amulet, the hidden room. They don't just point you toward the killer, they built a picture of what's been happening over time. This isn't a sudden event, it's a pattern. A series of actions carried out methodically, repeatedly, without being stopped. And that raises an important question. How did it go unnoticed for so long? Windhelm is a major city. It has guards, leadership, structure, and yet something like this was able to continue within its walls. That suggests a level of neglect or distraction or simply a failure to look closely enough at what's happening internally. Because the city is focused elsewhere, on politics, on division, on everything else happening on the surface. And while all of that attention is directed outward, something far more disturbing is happening quietly in the background. That contrast is what makes Windhelm such an effective setting for this quest. It's already a city defined by conflict, but that conflict is visible, obvious, constantly discussed. The Butcher operates outside of that. He doesn't contribute to the chaos. He exists beneath it, unnoticed because everyone is too focused on something else. And that makes the threat feel more real, because it's not something you can prepare for. It's not something you can see. It's something that exists alongside the normal life, hidden within it. The structure of the quest itself adds to this unease. You're not guided clearly from one step to the next. There's ambiguity, multiple paths, the possibility of false conclusions. You can accuse the wrong person, you can follow leads that seem convincing but ultimately misdirect you. And that lack of clarity mirrors the nature of the crime itself. Nothing is obvious, nothing is straightforward. You have to piece it together. And even when you do, there's a lingering sense that you've only uncovered part of it. The house becomes a focal point for all of this. It's not just a location, it's a record. A place where everything comes together, where the evidence isn't just presented, but embedded in the environment. The hidden room, the strange arrangements of items, the notes, it all tells a story without needing to say it directly. And that story is deeply unsettling because it's quiet. There's no spectacle to it, no dramatic confrontation, just a realization of what's been happening in a space that looks, on the surface, like any other home. That's what makes it stick, the normalcy of it all. The way something so disturbing can exist within something so ordinary. Even after the quest is resolved, that feeling doesn't fully go away. The killer is stopped, the killings end, but the city doesn't fundamentally change. Windhelm remains what it is, a place divided, focused on its own conflicts, moving forward without fully acknowledging what just happened. And that lack of resolution is important, because it suggests that the problem wasn't just the killer, it was the environment that allowed him to operate. A city where attention is divided, where certain things go unnoticed, where something like this can exist without being immediately confronted. That idea lingers because it extends beyond Windhelm. It raises the possibility that similar things could be happening elsewhere, unseen, unaddressed, hidden within the normal flow of the world. And that's what makes Blood on Ice one of the most disturbing discoveries in Skyrim. And also it makes Windhelm one of the most disturbing places in the entire game. Not because of how violent it is, but because of how quiet it all is. How easily it blends in, how long it continues without being stopped. It doesn't rely on spectacle or scale, it relies on proximity, on the idea that danger isn't out there in some distant ruin or forgotten cave. It's right here, in the middle of the city. When you place the killer alongside other disturbing NPCs in Skyrim, what becomes clear is that he stands apart, not because he's the most powerful or the most openly grotesque, but because of how normal he appears while doing something deeply unnatural. Take someone like Iola, for example. Her involvement in cannibalism is immediately unsettling, but it's also framed within a cult-like setting, tied to Namira and surrounded by others who share her beliefs. There's a structure to it, a clear identity. You know what you're really dealing with. The same goes for someone like Arundel in Ljungvild. His obsession with ghosts and control over them is disturbing, but it's also isolated, removed from society, hidden away in a cave where his actions feel contained within his own twisted world. Calixto is different. He doesn't isolate himself, he integrates. That's what makes him harder to place and far more unsettling over time. He lives in a major city, runs a business, speaks casually, and presents himself as harmless. There's no obvious signal that something is wrong. With most disturbing NPCs in Skyrim, there's a build-up, a tone, an environment, a set of clues that prepare you for what you're about to find. With Calixto, that preparation doesn't exist. You meet him the same way you meet anyone else. And that lack of distinction is the problem, because it means the threat isn't separated from normal life. It's embedded within it. Even someone like Cicero, who's unpredictable and mentally unstable, wears his madness openly. You know from the moment you meet him that something is off. His behaviour, his speech, his entire presence signals instability. There's no illusion of normalcy, but Calixto maintains that illusion almost perfectly. He doesn't draw attention to himself, he doesn't stand out in a way that would make you question him immediately. He blends in, and that's what puts him in a different category. Even compared to figures tied to Daedric princes, characters who commit terrible acts under the influence of higher controls. Calixto feels more grounded, and because of that, more disturbing. He isn't being controlled, isn't following divine commands, isn't acting as part of some larger cosmic force. His actions come from his own reasoning, his own obsession, his own decision to cross that line. There's no external excuse, no influence to point to, just intent. That makes his actions feel more personal, more deliberate, and harder to distance from. You can understand the framework of a Daedric cult or a corrupted mage, even if you don't agree with it. But Calixto's logic sits in a different space, one that feels closer to reality, closer to something that doesn't need magic or divine interference to exist. And that's what ultimately sets him apart from the rest. And Windhelm amplifies that feeling in a way no other city really could. This is a place already defined by division, suspicion, and distraction. The tension between Nords and Dunmer, the constant political pressure, the rigid social lines, it all pulls attention outward. People are focused on each other, on visible conflict, on problems they can clearly identify. And in doing so, they miss what's happening right in front of them. Calixto doesn't need to hide particularly well in a city like this. He just needs to exist within it. Windhelm creates the perfect environment for something like him to go unnoticed. Not because it lacks structure, but because that structure is pointed in the wrong direction. The city is looking everywhere except where it needs to. And that's what makes the entire situation hit harder. Because it's not just about one man doing something horrific. It's about a place that allowed it to happen. A city so focused on its surface level conflicts that it failed to see something far worse beneath them. And once you realise that, the unease doesn't stay contained to the quest. It spreads to the city itself, to every street, every building, every normal interaction. Because if something like that could exist there, unnoticed for so long, then how much else have you already walked past without realising? Forelhost doesn't hit you all at once. It settles in slowly, and by the time you understand what you're looking at, it's already too late to see the place as just another dungeon. On the surface, it's a Nordic ruin, one of many scattered across Skyrim, filled with dragger, traps, and the usual signs of ancient burial. You approach it expecting a standard experience, a climb up the mountain, a descent into darkness, a series of encounters that follow a familiar rhythm. And at first, that's exactly what it is. Stone corridors, burial chambers, and the quiet stillness of something long abandoned. But Forelhost isn't just a ruin, it's a record. A preserved moment of something that went very, very wrong. The deeper you go, the more that feeling starts to build. Not because of what's attacking you, but because of what's left behind. Notes, bodies, the layout of the place. It all begins to tell a story that doesn't feel distant or mythical. It feels immediate, human. The Journal of Scorm Snowstrider becomes the key to understanding it, and what it reveals reframes everything you've already seen. Forelhost wasn't just a burial site. It was a last stand, a dragon cult stronghold under siege, surrounded by forces determined to wipe it out. And inside, instead of surrendering, the inhabitants made a decision. They chose to die. Not in battle, not as a final act of defiance, but deliberately, systematically, poisoned food, a controlled, intentional end. And that alone is disturbing enough, but it's not really the full picture. Because it wasn't just warriors inside Forelhost, it was families, children. That realization doesn't come immediately, it creeps in. You start to notice smaller details, things that don't fit the image of a military stronghold, the arrangement of bodies, the scale of certain remains, and then it becomes clear. This wasn't just a group of soldiers holding out against an attack. It was a community, a group of people who lived there, who brought their lives into this place, and who all chose or were forced to end those lives together. The presence of child skeletons is what shifts Forelhost from tragic to deeply disturbing, because it removes any distance you might have had from the event. It's no longer about ancient warriors or long-dead cultists. It's about innocence caught inside something it had no control over. Children don't choose siege warfare. They don't choose loyalty to a dragon priest. And yet, they were there. They were part of that final decision. And that raises a question the game never answers directly. Did they actually understand what was happening, or were they just simply included? That ambiguity is what makes it so difficult to process, because there's no clear narrative that softens it, no heroic framing, no sense of sacrifice that feels justified. It's just an ending, quiet, deliberate, and absolute. Even the way it happened adds to the unease. Poison isn't chaotic, it's not immediate in the way a battle is. It's slow, intentional, something that requires preparation, agreement, or at the very least, compliance. The idea that an entire group of people, including children, went through that process together creates a kind of stillness around the event that's hard to ignore. There was no last charge, no final stand in the traditional sense, just a decision and then silence. The environment of Forelhost reinforces this in subtle ways. Unlike some ruins that feel chaotic or overrun, Forelhost feels preserved. The layout remains intact. The bodies are where they fell. The evidence hasn't been scattered or erased. It's like stepping into a moment that hasn't fully passed. A place where the outcome is already decided, but the weight of it hasn't fully faded. That preservation makes everything feel more immediate, more real. You're not uncovering something that's been lost to time. You're walking through something that still feels present. Even the Draga themselves take on a different tone once you understand the story. They're not just enemies, they're remnants of people who made that choice. People who died not in battle, but by their own hand. Now existing in a state that's neither fully alive nor fully at rest. It adds another layer to the unease, because it suggests that the decision to end their lives didn't bring closure. It extended something, twisted it, left it unresolved. Compared to other disturbing discoveries in Skyrim, this place stands out because of how grounded it feels. There's no Daedric influence driving the events, no external force manipulating the outcome. This wasn't the work of a god or a curse. It was a human decision, a response to pressure, to fear, to the inevitability of defeat. And that's what makes it harder to distance yourself from, because it doesn't rely on fantasy to be unsettling. It relies on choice. When you compare it to something like the Butcher in Windhelm, the difference becomes clear. Calixto's actions are disturbing because of their secrecy, their intrusion into normal life. Forelhost, on the other hand, is disturbing because of its finality. There's no ongoing threat, no mystery to solve. Once you understand what happened, it's already over. All that's left is the aftermath. And that aftermath doesn't offer resolution. It just sits there, waiting to be understood. That's what makes the child's skeletons so impactful. They don't tell you anything directly. They don't come with notes or explanations. They're just there, part of the environment, part of the story, forcing you to make the connection yourself. And once you do, it changes everything. The dungeon isn't just a place to clear. It's a place to process, to think about what happened, why it happened, and what it says about the people who were there. If Forelhost is disturbing because of a shared, deliberate end, then Mara's Eye Den is disturbing for the opposite reason. It's quiet, isolated, and deeply personal in a way that feels almost invasive to uncover. At first glance, Mara's Eye Den doesn't stand out. It's a small cave, easy to overlook, the kind of place you might pass without a second thought. There's no grand entrance, no immediate threat, nothing that signals importance. But like many of Skyrim's most unsettling and disturbing discoveries, it's not about what the place looks like. It's about what it reveals once you step inside. The cave itself is simple, almost bare. A few scattered belongings, signs that someone was living there, but nothing that suggests a thriving presence. It feels temporary, like a place someone retreated to rather than built up. And then you find the journal. That's where everything shifts. The journal tells the story of a man slowly losing himself, paranoid, isolated, convinced that something is watching him, following him, closing in. At first it reads like fear, like someone overwhelmed by the harshness of Skyrim's wilderness. But as the entries continue, that fear turns into something unstable. His thoughts become fragmented, his reasoning less grounded, his perception of reality more distorted. He isn't just afraid of something out there, he's trapped inside his own mind, unable to separate what's real from what isn't. However, Mara's Eye Den wasn't just empty, it was occupied. Vampires had already taken hold of the cave, and the smugglers either didn't know or didn't care until it was too late. And that's where the story shifts from simple greed to something far more disturbing. This wasn't a planned confrontation, not a battle between equal forces. It was an intrusion into something predatory. The smugglers weren't prepared, weren't equipped to deal with what they found, and the cave itself reflects that outcome. What remains isn't just a failed operation, it's the aftermath of people walking into something they didn't understand and losing. The presence of the vampires changes how the entire space feels. It's no longer just a cave with a story, it's an active threat layered on top of that story. The darkness feels heavier, the silence more deliberate. You're not just uncovering what happened, you're standing in that exact same place, surrounded by the same danger that ended it. And unlike the smugglers, you understand what you're facing. They didn't. That's what makes it unsettling, because their story is simple. They came for gold, and found something that saw them as prey. Compared to Forelhost, where the horror comes from a collective decision and a defined outcome, Mara's Eye Den feels smaller, but more immediate. Forelhost shows what happens when an entire group reaches the same conclusion. Mara's Eye Den shows you what happens when ordinary people stumble into something far beyond their control. One is structured, the other is abrupt. And that contrast makes them work together in ways that highlights two very different kinds of disturbance. Forelhost is overwhelming in its scale, the number of people involved, the children that died, the weight of the decision. It's a place where everything ended at once, where the silence comes from its finality. Mara's Eye Den, on the other hand, feels like something that was interrupted. There's no gradual decline, no long build-up, just a moment where things went wrong and never recovered. But both places leave you with the same lingering effect. They stay with you, not because of what you fight or what you gain, but because of what you understand. Forelhost makes you think about choice and what people are capable of when pushed to the edge, and how far that can extend. Mara's Eye Den makes you think about consequence, about how quickly things can go wrong when you underestimate what's out there, and how little it takes for a simple plan to turn into something fatal. And together they represent two of the most disturbing discoveries in Skyrim, not because they're the most dramatic, but because they feel grounded. One shows you a group choosing an end they believe was necessary. The other show you a group that didn't get a choice at all. And neither one gives you the comfort of a clear resolution, just silence, and the unsettling realization that some of the darkest stories in Skyrim aren't the ones you're told, but the ones you piece together yourself. Throughout Skyrim, the word cursed carries many meanings. Some places are cursed by history, their ruins filled with ghosts and draga. Others are cursed by Daedric influence, where mortals become pawns in games of cruelty. But this place is cursed in every possible sense. On the surface, it seems innocuous, an old abandoned skooma den hidden in the rift, where addicts gather to escape the harshness of life. But as the Dragonborn soon learns, this is no mere den. It is a trap, a place where blood flows as freely as narcotics, and where the unsuspecting are harvested by vampires lurking in the shadows. This place is not cursed because of ancient ruins or divine punishment. It is cursed because it represents the worst of mortal weakness and vampiric cruelty. It is where desperation meets predation, where Skyrim's downtrodden are consumed in both body and soul. At first glance, Redwater Den looks like countless other rundown hideouts scattered across Skyrim. Its entrance is marked by ruin, guarded by two dishevelled sentries who invite passers-by in with the promise of skooma. To the weary traveller or desperate addict, it appears to be nothing more than a place of temporary escape. The first impression is almost pitiful. The skooma addicts inside the front room are hunched, coffee and glassy-eyed. They mutter to themselves, sipping from bottles of Redwater skooma. For the uninitiated, this seems to be nothing more than a forgotten corner of society, a den of vice tucked away where no one of importance will bother to look. But the curse begins here. The addicts believe they are customers, indulging in bliss. But in truth, they are livestock. The redwater skooma they drink is no ordinary narcotic. It is laced with vampiric alchemy, designed to weaken the body and dull the mind. Each sip pushes them further into dependency and further into the vampire's grasp. This shabby front is the mask of a curse, a lie of escape that conceals the horror beneath. The true heart of Redwater Den lies past a locked gate. Once inside, the tone changes completely. The crumbling skooma den above gives way to a sprawling underground complex, fortified with Dwemer architecture and vampire construction. Here, the addicts are no longer customers, they are prisoners. Cages line the walls filled with weak and trembling mortals. Some mutter incoherently, others claw at the bars in desperation. The skooma they drank has robbed them of strength, and their veins are ripe for harvesting. Vampires stalk the halls like farmers walking their fields. To them, this is not a den, it is a blood farm. The skooma addicts above are funneled down here once their usefulness as customers is exhausted. Every corridor drips with its predatory curse. A reminder that Skyrim's most monstrous vampires are not content with feeding in the shadows. They have created an entire system of exploitation, one as organised and insidious as any mortal trade network. The descent into Redwater Den is a descent into hell itself, a reminder that beneath Skyrim's fragile civilization lurks something far more sinister. At the heart of the den lies the source of its curse, the Redwater Spring. This blood-filled reservoir is a font of unholy power, a well from which the vampires draw both nourishment and strength. It bubbles with crimson liquid, its smell permeating the entire complex. This spring is not natural. It is corrupted, infused with blood and dark magic. To the vampires who run the den, it is a sacred source, a place of ritualistic power. To mortals, it is poison, both physically and spiritually. The Redwater Spring ties the den to Skyrim's long history of vampirism and corruption. It feels less like an isolated feature and more like a cursed scar on the land itself. It does not merely provide sustenance, it demands suffering. Addicts above consume tainted skooma, are funneled below, and their blood is ultimately sacrificed to the spring. Here lies the essence of Redwater Den's curse, a cycle of endless exploitation, where mortal despair feeds vampiric power, and the land itself seems complicit in this horror. While the vampires are the architects of Redwater Den, the curse could not exist without mortal weakness. Addiction is the silent accomplice here, ensuring that the den never runs dry of victims. Skooma, long banned in Skyrim, is nonetheless consumed by the desperate, the broken, and the hopeless. For many, Redwater skooma represents the only escape from pain, poverty, or despair, yet the very thing they consume to numb their suffering ensures their enslavement. The curse of Redwater Den is therefore twofold: the curse of external predation and the curse of internal weakness. Vampires exploit mortals' desire for escape, turning that yearning into chains stronger than steel. Each addict is a tragic figure, not evil, but trapped in a spiral that ends only in death. This blending of addiction with vampirism makes Redwater Den uniquely unsettling. It is not merely about monsters feeding on mortals. It is about mortals unknowingly offering themselves up, bottle by bottle, sip by sip, until nothing remains. Most vampire lairs in Skyrim are crude, a handful of feral predators hiding in caves or ruins, feeding on whatever traveller they can snatch. Redwater Den is different. It is organised, industrialised. The vampires here have built an economy around suffering. They brew and distribute Redwater skooma, lure addicts, imprison them, and drain them for blood. The system is sustainable, efficient, and horrifyingly pragmatic. It is vampirism transformed into a business. This industrial nature of Redwater Den makes it cursed not just in a supernatural sense, but in a societal one as well. It mirrors the darkest aspects of mortal economies, where the weak are consumed to benefit the powerful. The vampires have simply taken it to the most literal and grotesque extreme. Walking through Redwater Den is unsettling not because it is chaotic, but because it is organised. The cages, the guards, the spring, all of it runs like a machine built on the suffering of Skyrim's most vulnerable. One of the most haunting aspects of Redwater Den is the silence of its victims. The addicts mutter, but they do not resist. The prisoners beg faintly, but their voices are weak. There are no riots, no desperate escapes, only submission. This silence is part of the curse as well. It shows how completely the vampires have broken their prey. By the time mortals reach the cages, they are too far gone to fight. Their spirits are extinguished, leaving only husks, waiting to be drained. This silence is worse than screams. It lingers with the player, making Redwater Den feel more tragic than any bandit hideout or vampire lair. The enemies here are not just the predators. It is the despair of those already consumed. Redwater Den's location is no accident. The Rift, with its forests and valleys, is also the centre of Skyrim's corruption. Riften itself is ruled by Maven Blackbriar, a woman whose wealth is built on exploitation and crime. The Thieves' Guild fester in its sewers. Skooma smugglers haunt its outskirts. Redwater Den is therefore the natural extension of the Rift's character. It is the province's corruption distilled into one cursed place. Redwater Den is more than a dungeon. It is a mirror of the darkest truths about Skyrim, the weakness of mortals, the cruelty of predators, and the failure of society to protect its own. It is a place that thrives on suffering, where the walls themselves seem to whisper of despair. Its curse is not one that can be lifted by slaying a single vampire or looting a single chest. It is a curse woven into the fabric of Skyrim itself, into the endless cycle of addiction, exploitation, and silence. The most sinister place in Skyrim is not a forgotten ruin or a Daedric shrine. It is Redwater Den, where every bottle of skooma is a chain, every addict is a victim, and every shadow a predator waiting to strike. In Skyrim, danger usually comes with warning. There are caves that reek of death, dungeons humming with enemies, crypts soaked in soul energy, places that tell you right away something is wrong. But Half Moon Mill doesn't. From a distance, it looks normal. A modest wooden mill on the banks of Lake Ilinalta, southeast of Falkreath, surrounded by trees, lit by moonlight, and home to two friendly residents, Hurt and Hearn. They offer you work, they sell firewood, make small talk. But stay longer than just a few minutes and something changes. The music doesn't shift, there's no jump scare, but the feeling does kind of settle in. Something's wrong here, and no one in Skyrim seems to care. Half Moon Mill sits isolated, far from major roads and trading posts. Unlike other mills in Skyrim, like Mixwater, there's no bustling family, no delivery routes, no economic link to a nearby hold, other than Falkreath and Riverwood, which they are suppliers of. But other than that, it's just Hurt and Hearn. No wagons, no guards, no traffic. The mill turns quietly. The wheel rotates through stagnant water. Piles of lumber wait beside a chopping block that never seems to be used. And if you stop and think for even a moment, the first mystery hits. Who is this mill even for, other than Riverwood and Falkreath? If you visit the mill at night, Hurt is often awake, and so is Hearn, for that matter. You'd think that's quite normal. They're millers, after all, hard workers. They'd be doing jobs day in and day out. But no matter what time you arrive, they're alert, eyes clear, unbothered by the cold or the hour. Ask them what they do and their answers are strangely flat. You only get 2 dialogue prompts, and they smile, say they work at the mill, say it's quiet, but they like it that way. Their tone never shifts, they never get any other dialogue responses. Their eyes never flinch, and if you're paying attention, you'll notice they never eat, never sleep, and never leave. They're just always there, waiting for something or someone to come. Hurt and Hearn are vampires, not suspected, not implied, but now confirmed. If you have the Dawnguard DLC, a Radiant quest from the vampire hunters may send you to kill one of them. They aren't hiding in a ruin, they're just operating at the lumber mill on the shore of a quiet lake. And Skyrim lets them. They're not hostile, they don't attack unless provoked like any other Skyrim NPC. They don't even flinch when you walk in, armed and curious. They just say something along the lines of, "Do you need any help?" It's not that they're pretending, it's that they don't really need to. Half Moon Mill is their lair, and everyone nearby seems to accept that. Or they just don't really know what's going on. Hurt and Hearn are the only two occupants of this mill. No hired workers, no children, and not many visitors, as they both said themselves. Even Morthal, just up the road, doesn't acknowledge them. There are no quests linking Hurt or Hearn to the city, no rumours and no accusations. Falkreath Hold guards don't even mention them, even though they're the suppliers of that hold. No one seems to ask where they got their food, or why the mill keeps running when no one orders lumber. And that silence feels kind of deliberate. Like the world has quietly agreed, don't talk about the mill, because it's just easier that way. Half Moon Mill is nestled into the northern edge of Lake Illinolta, one of the most lore-rich and eerie locations in the game, as I've already talked about in other videos. To its west lies the Illinolta's Deep, a sunken fortress filled with necromancers and ruined halls. And with these things that happen at Illinolta, it doesn't really just hide the ruins, does it? It hides memories, and the mill also feels like one of those memories, like something that's still functioning long after it should have been stopped. And when you go and look at the mill itself, you realise something. Nothing ever happens at the mill anyway. Inside Hurt and Hearn's home, everything does look quite normal, or as normal as a Skyrim NPC house would get. A fire burns, chairs are placed neatly around a table, there's food laid out, and when I say there's food laid out, there's food everywhere, but they never touch it. You can sleep in their bed, use their chopping block, talk to them like they're regular townsfolk, and yet nothing in the house feels used. It's like a stage set, built to look lived in, but there's no life here, only the performance of it. And I guess when you're both vampires, you don't really need a house, do you? You can just go out and probably kill some random traveller on the side of a road. So Skyrim fans have long speculated on Half Moon Mill's purpose. One theory is that it's a feeding trap. Hurt and Hearn may be using the mill to attract travellers like myself, especially low-level adventurers or traders, for feeding. Their friendliness lures you in, their remoteness ensures no one sees you go missing. Now, this is probably true, because once you go and look at the mill, there's a shed not too far from it. And in that shed, there are a bunch of bones and human flesh and beef everywhere mixed with blood. Now, I'm not the only one who probably thinks these are missing travellers that Hurt and Hearn have been feeding on. And I suppose Skyrim probably isn't going to tell us anytime soon. Another theory is they were allowed to stay. Some believe Falkreath's leadership is aware of them and tolerates them even though they're vampires. Maybe they provide services in exchange for secrecy. As in, if the Falkreath Hold was to put an end to Hurt and Hearn, they would not be able to get any more lumber. And maybe they've agreed to only feed on outsiders. We really don't know. But as any Bethesda game and Elder Scrolls game, you can't go without a theory where it's just cut content. Some think Half Moon Mill was once part of a larger questline, perhaps related to the Dark Brotherhood or vampire factions, that was cut late in development. But the lack of answers is part of what makes the place feel so wrong. If you stand outside the house for long enough, you'll hear it. The creak of the mill wheel, it never stops. No matter the weather, no matter the time, no matter that there's no one collecting lumber, no carts and no deliveries. It turns over and over again, like it's grinding something you really can't see. And maybe that's the real question. Not what the mill is for, but what it's doing when no one's looking. Because I know not a lot of people go there, and that's been confirmed by Hurt and Hearn themselves. So what's really happening when it's just those two at the mill? You can kill Hurt and Hearn. If you're sent on a Dawn Guard Radiant quest, or if you simply decide to test your suspicions, you can attack them. They'll fight back, they are pretty strong. Hurt in particular can surprise low-level players with her use of vampire drain spells. But if you win, nothing really happens. No one mentions it, no bounty is posted, no courier arrives, and no townsfolk react. The world goes on, and the mill just sits empty, or emptier than it was before. And after a few days, Hurt or Hearn is replaced by another random vampire, no story, and no explanation. Just kind of maintenance. Like someone somewhere needs the mill to be occupied, even though nothing is happening there. You leave the mill. You go back to the road, back to the story, back to the dragons and the quests and the prophecies all at once. And yet, something in you kind of lingers, or it did with me. You remember the house that didn't really feel real, the people who didn't blink, the wheel that never stopped running. You remember Hurt's voice, calm and detached even though she's hiding a crazy secret. You remember Hearn standing still in the doorway. And then you realise, in a world built to be explored, some places exist not to be conquered or looted, but to remind you that not everything is meant to be understood. And there's a lot of places in Skyrim that's like that, because some horrors don't really shout. Some just kind of sit there, smiling. That's what makes Half Moon Mill so inexplicably weird, the lack of shouting. Some places in Skyrim feel ancient, others feel cursed. Some feel like they were built on stories, tombs with legends etched in the stone, ruins full of screams and history. But then there are other places that feel wrong, not cursed, not haunted, just off. You walk into them and you feel the air shift, like something is watching, but not from above, not from the sky or some tower, but from the roots, from the soil, from the trees that creak just a little too much. Witchmist Grove is one of those places. It's not marked by grandeur, no NPCs whisper about it in the taverns, you don't go there unless the game really drags you. The trees are still, the shack is open, the stakes were already in the ground, and something about it feels like a scene that's already played out. You weren't meant to interrupt it, just witness it, and try to leave unchanged. Witchmist Grove is a small, unassuming patch of land tucked in Eastmarch, south of Kynes Grove and east of the Sulphur Springs. If you're playing normally, you won't think twice about it, until you stumble upon it during the quest A Night to Remember. A drunken misadventure involving a staff, a hangover, and a woman named Moira. The setup is comedic. You black out, wake up hungover, and begin retracing your steps. And one of those steps leads you here, to a shack hidden in a grove, surrounded by wooden stakes and birdsong. And then you meet her. She's not a woman, she's a hagraven, a twisted, feathered monstrosity, half witch, half bird, clawed and shrieking. And she believes that you're her fiancé. She fights you, you kill her, you take her ring, and that's about it. The game laughs, you laugh maybe, but Witchmist Grove stays with you. For a really weird reason. Before A Night to Remember activates, Witchmist Grove is occupied by a random witch or hag. The area seems like a minor encounter space, one of those locations scattered across Skyrim that gives the world texture. But once the quest begins, the location changes. Moira replaces the generic NPC, the interior becomes specific, and suddenly the tone shifts. The shack has no door, the floor is covered in blood, skeever heads and goat skulls lie broken near barrels. Hagraven feathers are tucked beneath the stairs, a single usable bed sits in the corner, surrounded by bones and flies. It's like a place where no one should live, and yet Moira calls it her home. She calls you her lover, and there's something about that chills more than any drag or crypt. She's not a boss, not a threat, She's someone who thought you'd return, who still wants you too. There's a temptation to write Witch Miss Grove off as a punchline. The entire A Night to Remember quest is comedic, inspired by The Hangover. It lets you experience a ridiculous drunken night you don't remember, a goat trade, a temple trashing, a stolen ring. But Moira isn't funny. Her dialogue isn't just mad, it's familiar. She doesn't scream, curses, or summon storms. She pleads. She acts like a jilted lover, a wronged fiancé. Her aggression feels more like heartbreak than villainy. And that makes the joke darker, because Witch Miss Grove, her home, isn't staged like a trap. It's staged like someone was waiting. There's no ambush, no minions, just a shack, a ring, and a letter you'll never find. Let's talk about architecture. Witch Miss Grove is one of the only player-accessible buildings in the game without a functioning door. You walk through a broken archway and you're immediately in her space. There's no loading screens, no barrier, just entry. It feels like the house is already open, already waiting. You're not intruding, you're expected. It's a small detail, but an important one. Doors in Skyrim are transitions between safety and danger, and between zones. The lack of one here makes the entire area feel exposed, raw, and vulnerable. You're in someone's home and they know it, and they've always known it. Hag ravens appear throughout Skyrim, usually as monstrous mini-bosses in forsworn camps or alchemical rituals. But very little is known about how they live or how they became who they are. They're women who sacrifice their humanity for power, often associated with dark covens and natural rituals. Hag ravens are deeply tied to primal feminine magic. In many cultures in Tamriel, they're whispered about but not studied. And yet Moira shows something rarely seen in her kind: attachment. She made a home, she made plans, she believed in a future. And even if it's a glitch, a gag, a side quest quirk, Witch Miss Grove becomes something else in that light. A love story. But one where the lover is a hag raven and the home is a shrine of bones. Skyrim excels at dungeon design. Tombs echo, Falmer caves drip with menace, Dwemer ruins hum with forgotten machinery. But Witch Miss Grove is different. It's not grand, it's not deep, it's not hidden. It's just a house, one you can walk into at level 1. And that might make it even scarier. Witch Miss Grove doesn't operate on combat tension. It operates on emotional dissonance. It feels like someone built it with love, or the Hagraven equivalent of it. The blood isn't meant to scare you, it's just there, part of the environment. Like this is normal. And maybe to Moira, it was. Let's talk details. There are 7 Hagraven feathers scattered under the steps. There's a destruction skill book by the bed. There's an unlocked chest, but the loot is minor. There are creep clusters, jazzbay grapes, and dragon's tongue flowers growing around the grove. Ingredients often associated with alchemy and magic. Everything here feels ritualistic, but no ritual is ever shown. That's what's so eerie about it, because usually in Skyrim, when you see a witch's lair, the spell circle is still glowing. The enemies are still chanting, the ritual is in progress. But Witch Miss Grove? It's an afterthought. The fire's gone out, the bones are cold, you're not seeing a ritual, you're seeing the memory of one. One of Skyrim's best tricks is making you feel like the world exists without you. But in this place, it goes further. It makes you feel like you missed something important. Like you arrived just a little too late or a little too early. You can't talk to Moira, you can't ask her why she thought you'd marry her. You can't ask if she made that ring herself. The quest doesn't care. The game moves on, but you don't. You leave the grove. The blood stays. The feathers stay, the air stays thick and silent. You wonder how long she has been waiting, and what she would have done if you had have said yes. There's a tone in Witch Miss Grove that's hard to name. Not horror, not tragedy. It's a kind of off-killer sorrow, like a joke told too late at a funeral. You're supposed to laugh, but the timing was wrong. The entire A Night to Remember quest plays for laughs, and for most of it, it works. The goat trade, the cult, the temple destruction, it's absurdity at its best. But Moira? Moira doesn't really feel like the punchline. She feels like someone else's story that bled into yours. And Witchmist Grove is the proof that she had one. You can visit Witchmist Grove before the quest. You can visit it after. Moira will be gone, the shack will still stand. The blood doesn't clean itself up, the skulls don't despawn, the house remains open. And empty. Most players never return. And why would they? There's nothing to loot really, no quest to complete after, no dialogue to finish. But for those who do, those who take the long way down the ridge from Kynes Grove, those who step inside again after the laughter's gone, they'll find something else. Not treasure, not danger, just a space. Quiet, cracked, and waiting. Because sometimes the most chilling places in Skyrim aren't the ones full of death. They're the ones that were waiting for life, but never got it. To understand why Wolfskull Cave is so disturbing, one must first understand the figure whose legacy it preserves. Potema Septim, the Wolf Queen. Potema was not merely an evil ruler. She was a force of nature, a storm in human form. The daughter of Pelagius II and the aunt of the Emperor Uriel Septim III. She manipulated the very empire from within, sowing chaos in pursuit of power. Her reign of influence was one of deceit, war, and black sorcery. Even in death, her name lingered like a curse, whispered through the catacombs of solitude. The legends say she could speak to the dead. Others claim she fed on their souls. When she finally died, her body was entombed deep beneath solitude. But her spirit, her will, refused to fade. Centuries later, necromancers sought to bring her back, choosing Wolfskull Cave as the place of her resurrection. The choice was deliberate. This cave, carved into the bones of an ancient hill, feels alive. The walls breathe, the air hums with magic, and every echo sounds like a whisper. It's a place where death never truly rests. What makes Wolfskull Cave so unsettling isn't what happens inside, it's where it is. The cave sits just west of Solitude, the capital of Skyrim, a city ruled by imperial authority, guarded by soldiers and seen as a beacon of order and civilization. Yet mere minutes from its gates lies a pit of blasphemy, a necromantic cult openly conducting rituals to resurrect a centuries-old queen of evil. The proximity is disturbing. It suggests that darkness in Skyrim is not distant. It thrives right under the noses of the powerful. While nobles feast in the Blue Palace and merchants trade in Solitude Square, the dead are being awakened in the hills nearby. It's this contrast between civilization and corruption that makes Wolfskull Cave so haunting. It's not just a place of danger, it's a reminder that Skyrim's peace is fragile, its light barely holding back the shadows. When the Dragonborn enters Wolfskull Cave during the quest The Man Who Cried Wolf, they find something few players forget. Deep inside, a massive cavern opens, a chasm lit by blue magical fire. Necromancers stand on platforms carved from stone, chanting in unison, their voices weaving through the air like smoke. Lightning crackles, bones rattle, and in the center, above a pit of spectral energy, a ghostly figure begins to form. "Return, O Wolf Queen, return to us," they cry. This is the summoning of Potema, a ritual of resurrection so powerful it shakes the very cave itself. The player witnesses the spectral outline of her spirit, clawing her way back toward the mortal realm, her laugh echoing across the stone walls. Even when the Dragonborn disrupts the ritual, it's too late. The ritual succeeds partially. Potema returns as a restless spirit, her essence scattered across the crypts of Solitude. Unlike many of Skyrim's caves, Wolfskull Cave feels deliberate. It's not a mine nor a natural tunnel system. It does feel built, as though someone long ago carved it out with intention. The stone is unnaturally smooth in places, and certain chambers bear the marks of old rituals. Torches flicker blue, chains hang from the ceiling, ancient runes faintly glow when light passes over them. It's unclear whether the necromancers chose this cave for its seclusion or because it was already tainted. Some believe it was once a temple to Daedric forces, possibly Molag Bal or Namira. Others think Potama herself may have used it during her lifetime as a site of dark experiments. Whatever the truth, its architecture tells a story. This place was meant for worship, for sacrifice, and for secrecy. The deeper you go, the more it feels like the mountain itself wants to swallow you whole. Wolf Skull Cave is filled with sound, whispers, wind, the hum of necromantic energy. But there's something else, something quieter, yet more disturbing. Presence. When walking through its corridors, players often describe feeling watched. The shadows seem thicker than they should ever be. The chanting doesn't always stop when you defeat the necromancers. Sometimes, even after the ritual ends, faint echoes of her laughter can still be heard. This isn't imagination, it's environmental storytelling. The designers of Skyrim created Wolf Skull Cave to feel haunted. Even without ghosts or monsters, the atmosphere alone creates unease. The lighting is pale and sickly, the geometry is claustrophobic, funneling you ever downward. The air is filled with faint dust motes like ash. It's as if the cave itself resents your presence, as though you are trespassing in a sacred tomb that wants to remain undisturbed. Although the player stops the initial summoning in The Man Who Cried Wolf, Potama's resurrection cannot be undone. Later, during the quest, the Wolf Queen awakened. You must enter her catacombs beneath Solitude to finish what the necromancers began, to destroy what they revived. This narrative thread, however, always leads back to Wolf Skull Cave. It's where it started. It's where the boundary between life and death was first perceived. What's chilling is that even though you cleanse Solitude of Potama's influence, Wolf Skull Cave remains. The necromancers may be dead, but the energy lingers. The torches still burn. The cave never resets to normal wildlife like other dungeons. It remains forever marked as though the ritual carved a scar into the land itself. Wolf Skull Cave is no longer just a location. It's a symptom of something deeper, Skyrim's inability to let go of its past. Why Wolf Skull? The name itself carries weight. Wolves in Nordic mythology are creatures of death and inevitability. They represent the wild, the uncontainable, the devourer of the sun at the end of the world. To add skull to that image creates something doubly grim, a symbol of both savagery and mortality. The Wolf Queen herself embraced that symbol. Her followers often referred to her as the wolf among the sheep, the devourer of kings. In resurrecting her, the necromancers sought to awaken not just her power, but her spirit and her hunger. Thus, Wolf Skull Cave becomes a shrine not just to Potama, but to the concept of corruption itself. It's where the civilized world's mask slips, revealing the beast beneath. What truly makes Wolf Skull Cave disturbing is not just its lore, but its psychological weight. It's not filled with jump scares or overwhelming enemies. It's filled with implication. Everything about it suggests desecration. The bones piled high, the blood-stained altars, the ritual chambers echoing with phantom chants. Even when empty, the place feels alive, as though the walls remember the horrors committed within them. Skyrim has many dangerous dungeons, but few feel as morally wrong as Wolf Skull Cave. Here, death isn't just an accident of war or survival, a deliberate perversion of the natural order. That makes it one of the most disturbing locations in all of Skyrim, not because of monsters, but because of human evil. Wolf Skull Cave stands as one of Skyrim's most disturbing locations because it's not about what's alive, it's about what refuses to stay dead. Potama's laughter may have faded, her bones may have crumbled, but her spirit lingers in the darkness. The cave remains silent and waiting, like a wound that never quite closes. Skyrim is full of monsters, bandits, and beasts, But only in Wolfskull Cave does evil feel so human, and that is what makes it truly terrifying. Wolfskull Cave is not just a place of death. It's a reminder that in Skyrim, some nightmares don't end, they endure. When you really think about it, what makes something disturbing in Skyrim isn't how big it is or how dangerous it looks, it's how quietly it exists. The game doesn't rely on dramatic reveals or overwhelming moments. It lets things sit. It lets you walk into them without warning, without build-up, and piece them together on your own. That's what makes it effective, because you're not just seeing something happen, you're arriving after it already has. You find traces, small details, bits of evidence that don't seem like much at first. And then slowly they start to connect. A pattern forms, a story takes shape, and by the time you fully understand what you're looking at, it's already settled in. That realization is where the discomfort really comes in, not from what the game shows you, but from what it lets you figure out. And it's rarely loud, it's not chaos or constant danger, it's quiet, controlled, sometimes even ordinary on the surface. That contrast between how something looks and what it actually means is what makes it linger, because it feels close, familiar, possible in a way that's harder to ignore. And once you've experienced that, it changes how you move through the world. You stop taking things at face value. You start looking closer, paying attention to details you might have ignored before. Every location feels like it could be hiding something. Every small clue feels like it might lead to something bigger. And that stays with you, not just the discoveries themselves, but the way they reshape how you see everything else. Because in Skyrim, the most disturbing moments aren't the ones that demand your attention. They're the ones that almost let you walk past them.